Zoom to YouTube?
Yeah.
Well, see, you're going to have to teach me that.
Exactly. Yeah. It's not really.
Oh, and I've accidentally hit video, but that's cool because we can edit that out. Now, I really don't even know how to introduce, because one, I never introduced anybody. But it was easier to introduce because I'm used to us sitting like this, and then I say, this is Dr. Dr. Daniel Degges. But Dr. Daniel Degges is actually here. So, Dr. Degges, aside from being one of the coolest historians on Earth.
Well, thanks. That one, I wasn't expecting that one. All right.
No, you and I go back. I think that, you know, we have to like de-escalate the formalities and say that we go back when I was getting my master's degree. You were getting your PhD.
And I was told there was a guy that was working on something and he was making people nervous and we need to and go find out what he's talking about. And I walked into a classroom and heard you and I was like, yeah, he knows exactly what he's talking about. That's exactly the stuff that I'm listening
Now, we
at.
can't get into who said that.
No, I'm sorry.
But that is so amazing.
That was part of that story. It was like, you know, you two are working on something totally, you know, close to each other. Will you go to this class and listen to this grad student, you know, and it was like this master student.
So
and so there's a certain level of my attitude walking in the room like, what is this? Who is this? And what have they got going? And instead I walked in, you started talking, and I was like, yes, 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 yes. That's exactly what's going on.
That is crazy because I remember you being in there. Mm-hmm. And I remember thinking.
Well, that's why he had me in there.
Well, okay, number one.
I mean, I don't know why we can't, because he's a wonderful man. I mean, he did everything for a great reason. Dr. Jala.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, he was cold. But
Dr. Jala was looking out for the best of all of us as far as that goes.
Well, this was the thing. The class was the African and the African American. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, okay, well, number one. Many times when I had classes on slavery, it was a Caucasian person teaching.
Yeah.
And when I had this class, the African and African American, I was like, if it's not either an African or an African American person teaching this class, I'm leaving. Because how can that be taught, you know, that topic? So when I got in there, I saw Dr. Joel. I was like, oh, okay, cool. And then I saw you, and it was like, he basically already has his PhD. So I'm thinking to myself, why is he here?
Yeah.
And as narcissistic as I am,
you never thought it was about you.
It never occurred to me.
And it was all about you.
Really?
That's why I was there that day.
So was it?
Well, I mean, it's because Dr. Jala wanted to do the right thing, and he was like a little bit, you know, this was kind of my field, and he's like, why not? You know? Mm. And I mean, he didn't brow me into it. He was like, you know, asking me politely, you know, would I like to come
Well, now in his defense, I did not know what I was talking about. As far as his Pan-Africanist view of the diaspora. In fact, I'm not sure that I was really familiar with the term diaspora for those historians or people interested in history that don't know. Diaspora is not just African people, but when you talk about the African diaspora, those are the people that were dispersed throughout the
world.
Through the world, not just by forced migration, but by natural migration as well. But that connection, that network, all leading back to Africa. So making all of that network a connected group. That's what the diaspora is, that they all came from one place and they all networked out. And he was trying to actually illustrate the connection between the American black person and the African. Mm-hmm. And I wasn't getting it at the time. And it really wasn't until the very end of the class and hearing YouTube Pan-Africanist, Dr. Umar Johnson, who I don't agree with a lot of things he says. I do agree with a great majority of what he says. But one thing that he said was that made it click, because sometimes it's not that you disagree, it's that you just don't understand, or you disagree because you don't understand. And his connection, what he said to make me click was people are worried about where they got dropped off as opposed to where they got picked up.
Yep.
And I was like, okay, I can process that. But I didn't. I had no idea that was actually cool.
Yeah.
But again, you were asked because had you taken your dissertation or you were ABD?
I was ABD. I had finished my comprehensive exams, and I was in the process of writing the actual dissertation while trying to teach also. And so I was right in the thick of it, of exactly the stuff we were talking about. In fact, so mine is really, it usually gets put down in the American Colonization Society, but I actually look at both the British and American attempts to create colonies of freed slaves in Africa. This idea that this was the way out of the slave system. That's exactly what they were on some level doing. But I look at the British and the Americans also.
How is the British and Americans colonization systems a way out, especially the British? How is that a way out of the slave system?
Well, so on some level, this is what, if you read it, so this is part of the reason that colonization has gotten kind of short-shifted afterwards, is because it's about their perception. Their perception is that it was these businessmen, that what you could do was actually relocate this labor source to Africa and then create a new type of system of colonies
So
that would be completely African.
When you're saying these businessmen, we're talking about American businessmen.
We're talking about British businessmen first, and then American businessmen latched on to the idea. The first 30 years of it really was based in London. And
that's
then,
now we're talking
continued
about Sierra Leone.
Well,
those types of colonies.
At first.
Okay.
Although they will end up eventually being invested in Liberia. That was one of my big things I found is that...
England?
Yeah. No, one guy... Okay, so this is the way to think of it. I just as an example, is this one white dude... I'm sorry. White
You can get by with saying white dude.
I know. Okay.
I'll get more problems with saying white dude.
Anyway.
But what's it called? Like notice. We're going to say white people and we're going to say black people. So anybody triggered,
I'm sorry.
I don't know what to tell you.
Yeah.
By the way, this is brought to you by Trust Methods. See, I got a Trust Methods shirt. Get one. I'm going to get a link. I'm going to have the producers put a link on here so you guys can get a Trust Methods shirt. I'm sorry. You're saying that...
All right, so this is giving you one example of it. There's one guy named Bidoff. He's just a British businessman, but this is the way that the empire worked at the time. He had mines in Scotland. He owned part of the port of Grenada. He was involved with a trade route in a ship that he owned that went back and forth to India. And oh, by the way, he owned 600 slaves in Jamaica and a plantation in Jamaica. Well, he knew that as though the plantation was having to be shut down because Britain had abolished slavery in the 1830s, as it's happening, he is trying to find another way to make money. And his way of making money, he found, like many others, was to actually support these ideas of colonization. They go there, the former slaves from Africa, from the United States, and then hopefully some of his from the Caribbean, could actually be relocated to Africa, where they would create an empire for him. That he would still be the owner, but he wouldn't be owning them as property, and so therefore they would be labor source. And so this is the reason he would have done it on some level. He's just one example, but this is a lot of what it is. Now, you notice I told you that story, and the first thing you went is like, there is no such thing that happened. Well, that's exactly what the end story is that what we have out of it left over is Sierra Leone and Liberia. But Liberia itself wasn't even the colony of Liberia. It was the colony of Louisiana, the colony of Mississippi, this and that. There was multiple. I think there was 12 involved, different colonies in it.
Now, and this is within
what we
a region that they called Liberia before it became Liberia, right? It was a bunch of them. It wasn't just one.
It wasn't just one, and they all came on after Liberia had started being the tagline for it, which is the way I like to put it, because quite frankly, on paper, it was not Liberia until the late 1840s. But it was the tagline that the Americans put on it when they started doing things before they even took the first ship there. It was Liberia, and the new capital was going to be Monrovia because the president at the time was James Monroe.
And Liberia, was the root word supposed to be liberty or liberation?
I think it was liberty, but I am not positive.
Okay, yeah, I believe I know it. I know it's one of the two because as I was researching the research you gave me for my dissertation, I remember coming through that information. So here's the deal. Okay. So what you're telling me is, now for colonization to be clear, when Americans, general public education, Americans hear colonization, we think 13 colonies.
Yes.
And tell me if I am wrong. I argue that colonization is a incorrect or even a euphemistic cover for what they were really doing, because a colony, all the way up until that point, especially in the Western Hemisphere, had an economic tie to the imperial nation. Mm-hmm. It had a cultural tie. They were citizens of that nation. They had a military tie, whereas if something happened, mm-hmm.
Yes.
They were military responsible. They generally also had a religious tie there.
Absolutely.
But with the United States and with Liberia specifically, and Haiti, it was like, go, and we want you to become citizens over there. There was no economic tie. There was no economic infrastructure.
So there was a wish for, I would actually argue that this really one of those four things that the way that the white population, the white business community looked at it when they were looking at colonization and what they would get out of it, they would have said that there was definitely an economic tie because they were going to go there and try to make money and, mine good materials and everything else. They put out 53 pamphlets about this. But the point of it is that would still be a tie. The military could be called on when needed. That was always the answer with colonization. This point of culture, on the other hand, I would actually argue is exactly what does change during this time, because you'll start to notice that what actually happens is that cultural tie of colonies that had been the previous known understanding of it mm-hmm. starts to go away because the United States forms. The American colonies separate and make their own country that is now being traded with in Britain. And so Britain starts to rethink the way they do colonies, and also the Americans have a different thinking of it. So they can still use the colony.
Don't go too fast. Don't go too fast.
Sorry.
You're saying
the term colony itself was something that they were using in some ways the way you're thinking about it. But one of the things that will shift in their colonies is that the majority of the population of their colonies, as we know in the 19th century, are not going to be English. They're not going to be the white people brought over from Europe. Mm-hmm. They're going to be from the actual place itself, with an overview of English people and a bunch of bureaucracy to keep them within the empire. Whereas India, Africa, China, all the different ones where Great Britain will go over the 19th century.
That's where I'm getting confused.
But see, this is the problem. See, this is the reason why it's confusing, because on the other hand, if you look at the 18th century and you look at, and this is where you could get lots of different arguments of exactly where you put it, but the American colonies were not. The United States, the 13 colonies, but more importantly, the 26 colonies mm-hmm. in North America and the Caribbean were not. They were mostly controlled by the Europeans, and they were led by Europeans that came over, and then they used Africans that came in as a slave labor source.
Now you feel it,
okay?
And that's where I was.
But guess what? It just happened.
What?
The American Revolution just happened.
I'm talking before the American Revolution.
Well, but the term colonization wasn't used before that. It wasn't used till 1787, and I think that's for the efforts in Africa. For the efforts in Africa.
I know, but this is what I'm trying to say. See, what you're doing is you're bouncing back and forth between world history and Western Hemisphere. Yeah. And what I'm saying is my distinction is the Western Hemisphere. 1492 forward. Not what's happening over there, because the definitions that I'm saying apply happened in this part of the New World. As they applied thought and definition to the New World, this is how these things were developing. Haiti, perfect example. They had a...
You mean the Saint Domingue?
Yes.
Okay, when it was a French colony.
Right. They had a Catholic connection because of France. They were considered, the people who were considered citizens were under French rule.
Yes, they were Frenchmen or considered French rule.
Right. When something jumped off, Napoleon had to come. So that's what I'm saying. Those connections.
But so what happens when you deal with these colonies that they created in Liberia and such? They're not expecting it to be run by the Americans or the Brits.
Which is my point. They're actually getting rid of people. That's removal. Yeah. That's not a colony. But I don't want to, and then that leads us into a question of why did they call Native Americans removal, Indian Removal Act, but black folks, that they were doing at the same time, because the removal of black folks, the removal of Native Americans, and the removal of Mexican Americans or Mexicans all happened at the same time, but they called them three different things. The Native Americans, they called it an act, a removal act. Black folks, they called it colonization. Mexicans, they did it by way of the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo. So why are they calling it colonization?
From a perception point of view, that's actually what I was trying to. I mean, I'm sorry if I'm getting around it, but on some level, it's this perception that they could use this as to say that they are a part of. They're a part of. They understand our culture. They have been here. They have been in the United States. They have been there. We are in fact imparting our culture out, and therefore that's going to be a part of why they're part of the system. It's all about perception. Even as they use the term colonization, you can find that there is no definite thought process that followed that along. Does that make sense? You see where I'm going with this?
Okay, where is my market in that? If I'm going to send these black
market. No. See, that's the market. Because the problem is, if the only way out of slavery is to end slavery, how can you send them? You can instead tell them how great it is. You can try to buffer the reasons for them to go, but you need to sell it on some level. And so the selling of it was to sell it to that it is colonization. You're going there to be a part of the system. This is your way in on some level.
Why is the assumption it was in any way to end slavery? Any interest to end slavery, especially on behalf of America?
Okay, so this is actually where one of those things, that this is the way they sell it from the very beginning. Okay. From 1787, they're selling it that on some level that this is part of the answer, because the answer of it in their minds was, we can't have an integrated society. We can't have an integrated society. That is a ridiculous notion. You have to have separate. And so on some level, what are we going to do? If you're going to end the system of slavery, which is dangerous, and is not as profitable as they wanted it to be, what are you going to do to replace it? And you have to find something that's going to replace it. I'm talking about it from their point of view, you understand?
Yeah,
but and so that the way to do that.
But particularly, Lincoln.
Okay, so now we're going on the other end of it.
If we're going to shoot forward.
Which is still the same attitude, ideas and attitudes.
Yeah, really not that far.
Racism is still the basis of it.
They were trying to get rid of free black folk.
Yep, from the beginning.
Slavery wasn't the problem.
But
it was free black folks that was the problem.
So you say that, but the thing about it is their mind is there is no room for what happens when we have all these slaves become free. What happens when they become part of the free people? And so that's what they wanted to do something with. Now, does that the way it ends up working out? No. That's part of the reason it's complicated, because if you actually look at who goes to Liberia, the majority of them that actually will go that way because they are freed in their master's will if they will go to Liberia. And in fact, states like Louisiana wouldn't allow. There was one time when they actually tried to pass a law And they did pass a law that actually said that you could not become free in Louisiana, that if you were freed from slavery, that you must be transported to Liberia. And that was, but even then they couldn't do it because the fact is that there was no funding behind it.
Right.
And that's always the other problem. They're not just when I say that they're trying to raise support for it, it's a dual process of it. Number one, they had to try to figure out how to get free people of color, is the way that they would have called it, to go to Africa. But they also had to figure out a way to get some funding to back up this in the first place, to get investments. And that's one of the misconceptions is by the later period when Lincoln's talking about it, it sounds like it's all about reformists, it's about the churches and different religious organizations supporting it. But that's only at the very last moments. Most of it is the business community. They're constantly looking at the business community to back this effort for it.
Now this started, they were talking about it, okay, just for chronological perspective. You have the 13 colonies, you have the Revolutionary War, 1776, 1780s and early 90s, they're actually putting the government together because the Articles of Confederation got them through the Revolutionary War, but it didn't do anything to levy taxes and to actually run the country. So they go back and say, let's fix the Articles of Confederation. And then people like James Madison was like, no, redo the whole thing. And that's how we got the United States Constitution.
Which some could say was a conservative backlash because it was that whole controlling factor. It was a controlling factor. Let's control the system in a way that the American Revolution left over was the Articles of Confederation, which allowed states to operate freely and then give when they could. And they said, well, this isn't really working. And so under that auspices, they do this. And so the U.S. Constitution on some level, even though Europeans wouldn't look at it as a conservative at the time, it's a conservative backlash. It is the idea that, well, we do have to have more control.
I thought it was because they couldn't pay all the debts from the Revolutionary War.
Where do you think a lot of the conservative backlash comes from? When you can't pay for things, somebody's like, how do we pay?
So we're on the same page. They were like, wait a minute, we didn't think about the money part.
Honestly, Virginia was like, we paid our debts, and Delaware was sitting over there like, I can't pay and I'm not going to. And they went, oh, crap, what are we going to do?
Yes, so they were like, okay, we got to get a cohesive deal. Which is work on because it's trickling down to the people, and then the people start uprising.
But the crazy thing is that's the very year that literally the news reaches England of the U.S. Constitution and the things that are going on in the Americas and several other things, and that's exactly the moment when the first Colonization Society is founded.
When was that?
1787, the summer of 1787. It was actually the first Colonization Society was founded. With the idea of going
as early as 1787.
Oh yeah, Granville Sharp had been working on it for several years. Granville Sharp had been a guy. He was a nobody on some level. He worked in the ports. He worked in the port system, and so he oversaw the incoming and outgoing of trade and slavery. And he was horrified by what he saw, and so he tried to figure out another answer. There's this weird guy, Smithman, comes up with an idea that's totally based in racism, but the idea that we can go and create fertilizers in Africa. And so the two of them, once Sharp hears about Smithman's plan, he comes up with this even better one. Why don't we start a colony? By the way, the first colony's named, the capital city's named Granville, after Granville Sharp.
Now this is in the United States?
No, that's in Sierra Leone.
Oh, okay, this is in Sierra Leone.
This is the creation of Sierra Leone.
And the American Colonization Society in 1816 copied them.
Yeah. In fact, there was many people that had been members, and because the thing is by the time it got to 1816, you had already gone through 3 different cycles of businessmen that were involved in this.
In Sierra Leone.
In Sierra Leone. Granville Sharp sends over this great group. He loves it. It's these former slaves from the American Revolution, comes over, and almost all of them die almost instantaneously of sickness.
Now,
the local African tribes actually does.
They came from Nova Scotia.
They came through Nova Scotia is the best way to put it. Like they when the revolution was over, they were sent to Nova Scotia, and unlike what most people would be
for the British.
Because they agreed with the British and they sided with it. And then they were stuck in New York City, and what do we do with them? And so they shipped them off to Nova Scotia and the cold frozen north, where all the white population there treated them, in the words of one of them, Peter, worse than I was treated as a slave. Yes, he said the Canadians treat me worse than I was treated, not the way life is. He said he was still glad to be free.
Wow.
Everything else.
Okay.
But that they all, like literally one of them, they would grab somebody's child out of their house and take it to their house to be their servant with no pay, just saying, well, you're black, it doesn't matter. And this is the kind of way they're treated. So they send a small group back to London to be like, hey, what's going on? Can we do something about it? They run an agreement with Sharp. Sharp says, hey, let's do this. Let's do this colonization. That first group that goes does it out of the freedom of their own expression on some level. You know,
right. They're trying to find greener pastures.
Yeah, exactly. It's just they get there. And,
which is why the American Colonization Society figured it would work, because it had worked in Nova Scotia to bring the people to Sierra Leone. So they said, okay, fine, we're going to do the same. So now we're moving toward the 18th century. America got free, got their governing, it took them basically 20 years to get their governing documents in place. The Bill of Rights, the Constitution, all of the stuff that, you know, get everything set up. So now, now everything's in place, which is the early...
And the War of 1812. They had to fight a second war with Great Britain.
Yes.
And that was actually what triggered
but they were
the
already...
Colonization Society.
That was just... The War of 1812 was...
Had no reason.
As far as them being organized, they were organized. It was just for a very, very oversimplification of it. England was going, nah, we wanted that.
Yeah. And the Americans...
Now, Andrew Jackson was president then, right?
No, he was the general. He wasn't president.
Oh, okay, he was the general.
He was the general that fought at the Battle of New Orleans after the war was even over.
Right, and but he figured out how to run them through that narrow area and get all that to where they were outnumbered, but he still won.
Yeah, in that battle, but the war was actually already over.
Right.
He just didn't know it. It was across the ocean. And
well, neither did the people who was coming after him.
Well, and the thing about it is that... The British soldiers didn't know anything. Let's give him his credit. Okay. Yeah. No. Absolutely. Now the reason I brought it up is because the American colonization starts at the end of War of 1812. It's like after the Americans have proved that they can get out. And in fact, there's one guy that's going to start. Henry Clay actually starts a term called the American System.
And Henry Clay,
and he's
the mentor of the center of my research, Abraham Lincoln,
because he's the big pusher for colonization. He is the man who organizes the first meetings and gets them all and manages to get John Quincy Adams and Andrew Jackson, which hated each other and completely disagreed on American politics, in the same room for a meeting. They were both considered. Andrew Jackson was a vice president for the American Colonization Society at the very first. It was only after a few years that he went, no, wait, I don't know what this is. It's not helping the South well enough, and he had to get out of it. But that was the whole point, is that they got the term of their time, New Englanders or Yankees, and the Southerners together on this one idea as far as the white businessmen of the country. It was part of this bigger part of this American system that you're going to make this work, and it's going to make profit, like they thought the British did. Even though the truth is the British had never profited,
right?
But that's us knowing now. They kept giving off the perception that it was a success.
Well,
it was a success.
But
when it wasn't.
I never found in my research, and what I'm learning are where our research is different.
Yeah,
you have a much more global understanding and focus of colonization, where I have a North American.
Well, I think it's also,
and I need to.
I think that's unfair to you, because the truth of it is, you really concentrate on the end of colonization, the 1860s and the 1850s, and you're going back from that to get the history. I started out at the beginning of it, going, why the hell are they even doing this in the first? Like, who thought this was a good idea? You know, I mean, that was really what, on some level, started it out. Like, why are they even doing this? Mm-hmm. So, I mean, so the fair thing is in mine was really to try, you had to start with England, because that was where all the Americans did everything they did because...
Am I wrong? The American Colonization Society never had an intention of making money off of colonization. It was truly to get rid of black folks. Am I wrong in this?
I actually think that it's one of those things that it gets buried in the story because I disagree. Okay. Because I disagree because of the way that they're talking. So the reason that you think that way is because on the most historians put it that way is because on the surface that's exactly what they're telling you. We're just thinking of them. But quite frankly, at every time that they go to set out to do one of these colonization methods, you will see the ads for it. Whenever they're doing the ads in the newspaper, doing this better cause, because in their minds that's what they're doing. But at the bottom, they're always willing to, at least if nothing else, tell you how much the price of cotton is running for in West Africa. They're always telling you what's going on with the money end of it. I feel you. And more importantly, it's where you look at who is actually investing into it. It is the American Colonization Society is the attempt of the leaders to actually make a success of it for their benefit. So it's a mixed bag. It's one of those things. The problem is that we constantly try to separate these two. And for the white population at the time, I don't think there was a separation. The separation was slavery is an economic system of labor, and it's not working. It's not working, and no matter which way you want to look at it. It's not because they were enlightened. It was quite clear. From the every other day revolts and everything else.
What evidence do you have that they felt it wasn't working? Because, and this is why
slavery wasn't working.
Yes, this is why I'm saying this. Because every American economy before because slavery funded the Industrial Revolution developing in England. Because from the 13 colonies.
Yes.
It developed up and then it got out and then it came to North America. But number one, the South had an agricultural foothold because of their climate and their soil, right? Because that was geographical why they did it year round.
Well, after the cotton gin.
Huh?
After the cotton gin.
Okay.
It was a little bit of one, but this is actually part of the secret.
But you're actually making my point for me.
Well, but that's making my point.
Every business in the North processed the raw goods of the South.
Ooh, and England did too. Go ahead.
England owned all of it at first. So they had...
No, later on, even after they own it. The American South is where it comes from.
Because they're selling it everywhere. That's why the South is kicking butt and taking names. We're not disagreeing at this point. But I'm saying the lumber yards were making money from the slave ships. Sure. The insurance companies were insuring the slave ships. The textile companies were processing the raw goods created by the so everybody was eating off slavery.
Yep.
Nobody really wanted slavery to stop except for the people. It really did not come to be an issue among white people. Slavery. Free black folks, yes. Slavery, not necessarily, because every time
it was something that
every time it came up as an issue, when money came up, the Haitian Revolution, and then the
it's always our
purchase. Oh, wait a minute, we got to get this money and we need labor. It dropped political.
Yep, it does because the media.
But it was always about the free black people and getting rid of the free black people. It really was not, we got to end slavery until it was the Western expansion.
Well, I would disagree because they immediately start talking about it from the beginning. Even, like I said, the 1787, when they start the first Colonization Society, the same members are the same members of the Abolition Society that started in the same town literally like a month later. But
that was America.
But that's no. I am going back to Britain first. But hold on. But we're going to get there.
Okay.
Because this is the thing: is that it's one of these dilemmas. Because this is the dilemma that they're all going through. Because they constantly look forward to. All right. I think of it as honestly, maybe this is a crass thing because I've read Drescher and there's many historians that have argued about this, of exactly where it comes on to. And honestly, I'm actually more siding with an old African-American historian that was kind of discredited, except for nobody understands that he's dealing with perception. But the perception was, even as each time they would give up on the new cause, they knew that the bigger problem that they had to take care of was this problem of slavery. So Thomas Jefferson. So let's put it this way: like, for instance, Thomas Jefferson said that slavery. What do you know about his big quote about slavery? It's like hanging on to a wolf by the ears. Because
he also said God is not going to allow this to continue to happen before if He's just, it's going to turn on us. Yeah. But until God does that, I'm going to get this bread because I got slaves at home. Right. That's what I'm saying. Yes, it wasn't that the forefathers were men at their times and did not know better. That's not true. People have been saying all the while. I think 12 of the first 16 presidents were slave owners. So 4 of them, I think I know 2 of them were
John and Adam.
And they were like, nah, player, that ain't the way to do it. So there were always white people that said, we really should be doing this. When they made the Constitution, they purposely did not put slavery in the Constitution. The Constitution was almost 200 years old before they put 17, 18, 19. Yes. No. It was over 100 years old before they put the word slavery in it, the 13th Amendment.
75 years, but yeah. Oh, I got you. I'm sorry.
75 years old.
I'm sorry. The point being...
Yes, it was a long time that they purposely avoided something that was dominant, that the entire country was...
But that's part of the reason that you look at it, because it's one of these... Okay, so I'm sorry, but on some level, look at the questions of the way people think about global warming now. Is this eventually going to hurt our economy now? Are we going to run out of things? What is this doing to us with population? These questions all come up now, and people take it seriously and do think about it. But your everyday economic needs outweighs that.
Being a yuppie.
Oh,
I'm not going to let you off on that.
I am not.
Because we don't control global warming. We control slavery. Slavery was the choice. It is only our narcissism that makes us think we can affect the earth. The earth takes care of us. We cannot go hurt the earth. That's just narcissism on humans' part. But this was something they were doing.
Well, they would have actually said slavery is a part of human existence, and we've been doing it for 3,500 years.
Yes, and that is cognitive dissonance. So again, that is narcissism.
Okay.
I got you on that. Sorry. So again, I said global warming, narcissism. Cognitive distance.
Are you sure that's not cognitive distance?
What? What's
the idea that we don't have, that we can't actually, that some of the processes we're going through is actually making a difference in the way the globe warms up?
Oh God, no, that's not cognitive distance. That's science. Mm. You know that the Sahara Desert used to be a rainland. It used to be a rainforest.
It was a long time.
Well,
the
Earth changed heat. You know we had an ice age. Now we don't. The Earth got warmer. The Earth got colder. When the Earth adjusts its axis, it moves further away from the because it doesn't just turn this way. Now we can
we need to get away from this, because I can tell right now that this is not going to be the answer that's going to get there for you, or to me, because we are going to disagree on this one no matter what.
Okay, you can disagree with astrology all you want to, but it's a science. The Earth turns.
Astrology. Where do we come into astrology?
The Earth turns this way, and it tilts like this. That's how Ice Age happened. Yeah. So when it tilted, and it doesn't move in a purple circle, it moves in an oblong. So the further it gets away from the sun, and the more it's tilted away from the sun, it gets colder. That's why the Ice Age happened. When it orbited back closer towards the sun and tilted back this way, everything melted. That's just...
We also are making a difference. Okay, all right. So back to the slavery thing, because we're not going to get there. And I actually do, in general, agree with you on the slavery problem. I will say that the slavery was about the perception. It was about the perception of which way it was going. And remember, we're not talking about the mass majority of the population. The mass majority of the population agreed with continuing slavery no matter what.
Oh, of course.
There is a group of people...
We have slavery now if people agree with it.
But the backers of colonization were the people that actually believed that we needed to do something to get past slavery, and that slavery was an economic format that wasn't working in the long run.
Then why did they go for the free ones?
Oh, because that was the best way to get all of it going, is because if you can get the free population, those are the ones that are actually have been educated on some level. They are immersed in American attitudes and ideas. We can send them to west coast of Africa, and they will love to do business with the businessmen in Philadelphia, in New York, and do what we need to do, and also take our religion and also take it into Africa, and so therefore spread Christianity.
That's
Which is part yeah.
So they're asking free blacks to colonize.
They are,
and
and I realize that makes no sense. But if you look at it, that's exactly what they're doing. And in fact, that's part of the reason it will take 3 years to even get one ship to go. Because they're constantly advertising to get those.
It took 16.
The first ship. 1821.
Yeah, but they started in 1816.
Yeah. Okay. Well. So 4 years. All right. The point is 4 or 5 years.
Yeah.
Before you get the first ship.
But they're advertising it as let's go start a new colony, or let's just get some slaves. Like what?
No, not to get slaves. To start a colony.
This is how we put it. We ain't treating you right here. We ain't never treated you right here.
So we're just trying to get rid of them.
Yes. It's a removal of free black folks.
Okay.
But that's not the way they were selling it.
Some people were, and that was the thing. People in the North were selling it as, oh, it's a paternal act. You know, these people are being treated wrong, and you'll be happier with your own kind of people. Like black folks had not been here for over 100,000 years before.
Generations,
you know,
at least.
I mean, literally 100,000 years. Black folks have been on because if you go back to the old,
the ancestors of the people we're talking about had already been here for 12 generations. It had been brought over.
And that was just the people that were originally
the people you're actually looking at.
The people.
Sending.
Well, not necessarily, because a lot of those people were indigenous people that were black, but because when the native lands were being taken and when that was being justified or rectified or addressed, if they looked like Joel, they were like, oh no, you're of African descent, you're not native. That's why we have all of these issues over black people saying we are indigenous people. African people have been here since Mansa Musa, which is 400 years before.
How do you get to Mansa Musa came to the Americas?
How much time do we have on here?
Mansa
Musa was the richest man ever. He was from Mali.
Yeah, he was actually 3 different people that you're made into one. Made into one. He's actually the title.
It's a title like Buddha.
Yes.
Buddha.
And every time
Buddha's a title. Now Buddha was an actual guy, but the name Buddha is a title. It means teacher. Okay. Mansa Musa sent out however many ships, right? Because he knew something had to be on the other side. They wanted to go investigate. They send them out.
And he wasn't the only one. But yeah, go ahead.
We're talking about him.
Okay, go ahead.
He sends them out, right? And the seas were crazy. Now, we now know, because we have hurricanes every year, we have a hurricane right now, that if you just sit on the coast of Western Africa, Nigeria, in a raft, a certain time of year is going to take you to the Americas, just by the natural currents.
Sure.
Okay. So when it was only one of those ships, I think he sent out 100 ships. I think only one came back and was like, yo, the sea was too bad. It was nobody made it. Well, by the time the Europeans got over here, the Europeans discovered that there were places and designs and names that were in Mali.
Just like the Easter Islanders and the Chilean coast. It's the same story with the Americans. We've oversimplified that there were groups that came in. Okay, that's what you were talking about. It was that there wasn't an open back and forth, though. Well, Mansa Musa never had connection with them afterwards. Because once they were gone, there was no seem to be connection.
Here's the thing. The Moors.
Where's the evidence of that?
Well, I'm about to give it to you.
Okay.
The Moors.
By the way, if you can't tell, we are actually friends. We do this all the time. In fact, that may be part of the
That's
problem.
what we said. We had to get this. Because, unfortunately, a lot of people have an issue discerning a discussion of racism in being anti somebody else.
Yep.
I'm not going to say racist because racist is not a bad thing in itself. A racist is someone who studies race. It is someone who has a great application in race. Just like if I'm a musician and I play the piano, that doesn't mean that I don't care for any other instrument in the orchestra. I elevate the piano, so I am a pianist.
Or a piano man.
So if I played the flute, it doesn't mean that we don't need the string section,
Yep.
but I am a flutist, okay?
Mm-hmm.
If I study sociology or history, but my particular interest is in people of African descent, then I am functioning under particular race. So I am a racist. The extent to which...
That's why Carter G. Woodson called a race man. I think he's the one who started it. Race man.
But...
Well, I grew up with that term. Like, you're a race man. Which what didn't mean you were racist. It was trying to make this connotation of exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah,
like being a piano man. You're a race man.
I don't have
dealing with this. This is what you're talking about.
Addressing race, and I can criticize race without being cruel, and I can even care for my race to be cared for first. The problem comes in is what I'm willing to do for that to happen.
Yeah.
If I'm willing to lie, kill, maim, rape, steal, oppress, that's the difference. So what we're talking about is bigotry. What we're talking about is discriminate. And those come from a position of power, which is why you hear black people can't be racist, because of the power that's associated with it. So what I'm saying is, these are the conversations that need to be had as to where people can talk about this. And it's like, wait a minute, if I'm on a live and I'm talking about race, either by myself or with other black people, it's generally shut down as, oh, they just don't like white people. And it's like, well, that is a far jump from what we're talking about. So I think, number one, people need to know that you can have these conversations and we can disagree and not even be disagreeable.
Yeah.
We can, but the key is I'm educated in what I'm talking about, and so are you.
Yes.
So when you say, well, hold it, thus and so forth, blah, 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 thus and so forth, this is, oh, okay, wait a minute. Well, now, are we talking internationally, or we talking, no, I'm just talking about the Western Hemisphere. So now we can actually get into where our perspectives are coming from an educated point. I think when a lot of people bail on racism as an out is because I don't have any information. And when I run out of information, which I got that much of, I start talking emotion. Well, you just don't like me.
Emotion and opinion. Yeah. Go ahead.
Now, do you think, because I'm going to have to please ask you to come back and do this again, because I really do want you to talk about your dissertation, but
we talked about it a little bit.
You and I,
here and there.
You and I,
this is exactly what I always have.
We went right back into Darnell and Dan and just start arguing. Is a person who is white by all appearance.
Yep. Who's organized and boxed in that frame.
Yes, yes.
Not only that, middle-aged white male.
Fatty. Victim. Are you accused? I hear victim a lot. If you address public happenings or historic happenings, I hear, oh, that's victim. That is victim. Or white shame. What do you get being a scholar that actually identifies the injustices or just the history of the era, what type of reception do you get? Is it aggressive? Do even black students kind of push away from you?
Okay.
Or?
So it's number one. It's like everything else. We love to put things in boxes, and that's what we're talking about. People do, but quite frankly, people will surprise me every day. I mean, that's the number one story, is that people will surprise me no matter which way. Now, I will say, so I teach African history here because Dr. Jala retired, and I'm the one who actually does it now. And I will say, every single student that comes in that door, they didn't know ahead of time. The first day they come in, I don't even wait for them to say anything. I'm like, yes, hi, I'm the one who's teaching you African history. Come on in. We will talk about this.
They walk out and check the door. And like,
yeah, they do. They do. Everyone, they're like, and by the way, like, it doesn't matter what color and creed they are. Like, they're all doing that. They're like, wait, what? I'm like, come on in, we'll talk about it, you know? And that could be a whole lesson, because it does. It usually takes an hour to really discuss it. Mm-hmm. But it's also, once we do, we can talk about it all then, too, and where they belong. So my point is that, yes, sometimes there is a certain amount of disconnect to it. And, you know, on the average day-to-day basis, sure, like somebody meets me in the street, I can see the way that they may judge me one way or the other based on what they see. But meanwhile, it's all, people will surprise you. There is no telling which response you're going to get. There are educated people that I feel like can't get through the box and see past, you know, why are you doing this? You must be doing this for some different reason that I don't understand. No, I'm doing it because, honestly, I grew up in a constantly surrounded by African Americans. And then I went in the business community and started selling diamonds that were out of Africa. And in the process, realized what was going on some level with the white business community and the confrontation this was going on in the background. Mm-hmm. And so that's why I do what I do automatically. I mean, that's the simple answer. Mm-hmm. I think it's much more complicated, but that is the simple answer on it some level, is I see that. That's why when I'm talking, I'm still doing, you know, it's like we're talking, one of the things I don't know if it came across is, this is not because we're recorded. I always try to do the whole, like, I'm doing the perspective of those white businessmen, even though I can't stand them. I hate them, and what they stood for. Mm-hmm. But that's what I'm doing. And that's the bigger problem, is I go into a classroom or something and they go, wait, does this guy, because I'm trying to tell them about it, and they're like, wait, does he agree with that? I mean, you know, it's like, no. Well,
yeah, I can entertain something that doesn't mean I subscribe.
Exactly. Well, you know, that's always the problem. Mm-hmm. And it is a constant problem. But more importantly, sometimes it's better to be able to entertain all these other perspectives that, you know, the individual has that you don't expect them to. You see where I'm going?
Are people, do you find justification in that? If Joel's Nigerian. Okay. And Joel,
you're a Nigerian American?
I was born here, but both of my parents are from Nigeria.
That's what
so Joel's like, African history class.
Yep.
And he goes in there and he sees you. So either you're a colonizer, or you're a white American that is
playing on the guilt.
And not necessarily playing on the guilt, but again, it's playing into the white supremacist trope of whatever you learn comes through the white psyche.
Yeah.
Is that fair? Because I'm going to be honest with you. Like I said with Dr. Jola's class, the name of the class was the African and the African American. And I said, if and I had other, slavery history classes that were taught by white people. And my thought was, okay, you can study the period so you can teach the period. But a relationship between the African and the African American, there is no way you can teach me this.
No.
There is no part of it. So that's why I went in there feeling that way. But then I could see people who maybe less involved or whatever. But if I come into a classroom and I do not know Dr. Degges, and wait a minute, my parents know more about African than you do. They're from Africa. Is that fair?
I mean, it's a good question automatically, number one. I hesitate to say it's fair because honestly, I don't. All right, so I teach African history, I teach U.S. history, I teach world history. Mm-hmm. I teach all of these. And the reason I feel like I can stand up and actually be the professor in the classroom is because I believe that if I get the historical tools, if you were in my class and both of you were in my class, yes, at first I'm going to try to introduce you to the big broad outline, and there's a lot of that is Western centric. Mm-hmm. And I have to define that. That's my problem. That's what I've got to do when I go in and be like, this is the Western centric point of view, and this is on the other hand, this other point of view. And by the way, right before class, Africa class, I gotta read some Toye and Falola to make sure I got who's a Nigerian American historian, to reorganize, like, okay, which way to kind of try to take the direction. But what I'm really doing is giving you the tools to do history yourself. That's really that's what I'm there for. That's what I really think I'm there for. Yes, I give you the big broad out view and I set out the way it's done, but in every single one of these classes, and you can look at all my syllabus and everything, I am heavy on, like, you do presentations or you do research paper, and we build it all along the way. And more importantly, about, like, kids always panic no matter what the topic is, whether it's Africa or something else, about they're worried that there's some other some part of the story that they've got to get where I will be happy. And I'm like, no, you follow the instructions. The instructions are, you give me evidence to create your point. You ask a question. We go through this, you answer it, and where's your evidence for this? Because even though that may not be the way I see it, I want your opinion to come into this room, your perspective, not your opinion. And so actually that's the way I end up doing it. In Africa class, I love the fact that if I can get them through the first day, sorry, but it's true, if I can get them through the first day, then I will have, a group of 15 students, at least here at UTA, it'll be, a third of the class will be, people of European descent in some port, at least that's the way they present it. Mm-hmm. And then there'll be a third of the class that'll be African Americans. And there'll be a third of the class that are from different parts of this vast continent called Africa. And none of them are worth more of the story than the other. They all have got a good perspective to bring into the room that when they're listening to the others. Mm-hmm. And when they're all giving evidence, we can actually have a much better conversation about it. Now, does that mean that I am as good at teaching that class as Dr. Jala? Hell no. Like, that man grew, he lived it, he breathed it, he was, everything else. But this is what I can do for any of them, is to actually try to give it where it's like everybody's perspective. Part of it's because I come from a different background where it was the same way. Like, I was taught early on, like, don't think you know what you're talking about, but it's because you had these opinions thrown at you. Mm-hmm. Like, you better give me evidence. You better tell me why you think this. Where is this? Can you document this? And that's why it becomes important to see all the different perspectives. I'm sorry if it doesn't answer the question exactly.
No.
To me, that's exactly the bigger point. It's like, honestly, the little moments of, like, how are you going to know? I also have to offset with, you said the class of African and African Americans. I've had classes where I realized I did not realize I did realize. I knew that there was some disconnect that African Americans on some level went Africans and you're part of the problem. And that this was an old idea that went through the African American community, at least in certain parts of the South where I grew up. And that still kind of pops out in the class. And that's one of those things that I've noticed, like, Dr. Jala was good at smoothing things and he presented all the perspectives for it. Mm-hmm. And I have to just let the students do it. I have to let my African American student and my African student actually discuss this stuff in class. But that's why it's so important. You have to stick to the evidence. And this is what history does. Is that as a profession, why do I do this? Because I don't just do this because I like reading, old white history. Mm-hmm. It's because, on the other hand, it's because we can do this because it's a process. It's a process that allows you that if you're going to be into it now, is that you've got to create an understanding and have the background knowledge and present your perspective with the knowledge of what actually happened, at least on the ground. Mm-hmm. And bringing that forward. And meanwhile, you and I can have a tweet. That's one reason, like, you say that, like, it got so easy for us to get into, like, what I think of as, it might even seem like we disagree on stuff. And we disagree on small points, but that's the point. Right. We agree on the bigger picture, right, which allows us to do that. It's to just have the little disagreements about, like, well, you know, you look at this story and notice we get into the mountains of moose. We could have, like, I could have 3 hours of conversation about this alone. I mean, at least. But, you know, this is, you know, which way you look at it. And so it causes problems, but more importantly, it doesn't mean shut down those problems. It means the opposite. True that. And most of my time is to sit back in the back and just let everybody else do the talking.
Well,
believe it or not.
On that, I think we need to go ahead and wrap this one. But
too much
wonderful,
talking,
brother. I appreciate you coming, and I promise, the next time, I don't care what you say, I'm not going to be baited into debate.
Baited.
I'm not going to be baited into debate. I'm just going to look at you, and I'm just going to say, what is your dissertation about? And then you're going to say something, and I'm going to say, but tell me about your dissertation, because I want to really get into the dissertation. But no, I think that was actually a more...
That's a good introduction. This is the way it always is. Like I said, it's just like my Africa class. We got to come in and go, okay, well, wait a minute. Why are you sitting here?
Yeah. So then, but that's what we're going to do. So we're definitely going to have you back.
So I can't learn next time? I got to do all the talking?
But I got to do some learning. But I got to do some learning because your part.
But I'm selfish. I want to learn.
Well, then you go and watch the other videos on my channel.
You can like, subscribe.
But the next time you come, I want you to have a Trust Method shirt. So you got to go to trustmethods.com.
Is it just t-shirt? They ain't got no t-shirt.
Etsy.com/trustmethod.
But they ain't got no
t-shirt.
Huh?
They ain't got no t-shirt.
Oh, they got bags. They got breeches. They got jackets.
We got pants.
Yeah, well, that's breeches. He don't know. He young. He don't know what breeches.
I thought breeches were. I don't know. Okay.
Breeches and pants. All right. Let's go ahead and get this.
We got breeches.